Overtime Hockey Talk. My name is Mark Paul. My co-host Justin Baker and I are ready to roll through all the signings that have occurred in the last 24 hours, but even a few slightly before that. Some pretty big shifts in power throughout the league as free agents find their new home. Justin, welcome to Overtime Hockey Talk Free Agent Friends. No, we can't do Free Agent Frenzy. That's someone else's, right? Like, what do we call this thing? Do we have a good name?
Man,
I told you to come up with a name. Does it have to rhyme with overtime? Yes, and hockey. Rover rhyme, Pocky Hawk Day. This is terrible. This is going down a horrible road.
Move on. Let's move on.
Just stab that one, edit it out, but I won't because I'm too lazy. And let's just. All right, we're gonna go back to July 11th because maybe some of our listeners, there's so many signings. I think right now Cap Friendly has it at 102 signings right now. Total contract years 228, and then 732 million in contract dollars. That's not including Nazem Kadri and Johnny Gaudreau at this point. So there's a lot to get to. On July 11th. On that Monday, a couple big re-signings. Valeri Nichushkin, 8 years, $6.125 million a year. I'll say this: talking about the contracts, rather than like 8 million, 49 or 8 years, 49 million, and getting to the cap hit, I'll just say 8 years at 6.125, and we'll just leave it at that. And that'll be the way that we talk this through, so we can just avoid having to say millions of numbers as we're chugging through this. So Nichushkin signs 8 years, 6.125 a year. And Ricard Raquel, another big signing. I did not expect for him necessarily to re-sign in Pittsburgh, but 6 years, $5 million a year. What do you think of both of those re-signings? Any thoughts?
Man, so I'll be quick. The Val Nichushkin deal, this one worries me a little bit, mostly because, listen, he was underwhelming in Dallas. He came out his first year, 34 points in 79 games, so he looked like he had some promise there. Didn't really develop the way that I think they had hoped he would develop, but I will say he never really – it seemed like his minutes were always going down year after year in Dallas, and then he finally leaves, goes to Colorado. He looks like, okay, cool, he could be a decent third-line player. And then this year just explodes with 25 goals, 52 points in 62 games, and playing upwards of 19 minutes a night. So clearly Colorado has, an idea that this guy's going to be a winger in their top six for years to come, and they're certainly paying him for it. So I like the idea of getting him re-signed. I just don't like the term.
Sure don't like the term. No.
Yeah, if they had done 2, maybe 3 years at this price point, I would have said, okay, cool. You know what? That won't really bite them in the ass if he doesn't work out.
Even 4, it would have been. But sure. 8 years for Nichushkin. I think a year ago, if you told me that Val Nichushkin was going to get over $6 million a year for 8 years, I would have thought that he scored 40 goals.
Right.
Yeah. I don't love the deal, but I also I guess I get it. Like, no, you know what? This is what I don't get. Why are you trying to keep him at this price point when you could have kept Nazem Kadri probably around this price point? That I guess is where you look at it. I get he is a little bit younger, but he's not a center. He's a winger.
Now, I wonder if this is Joe Sakic or their new GM that had his hands in this one, because
I think that Joe Sakic is making the calls here.
Well, I'm sure he still is. There's no doubt about it. But I think this screams a little desperation, right? Like, hey, we're worried we're going to probably lose Nazem Kadri. So we got to keep what we have to kind of keep the band together. And, gosh, it almost seemed like they were a little desperate to overpay just to keep him. So
yes, and the GM that we're referring to, Chris McFarland, was promoted from being an AGM, which he has been since 2015 for the Avalanche. He's actually been an AGM since 2007 with the Columbus Blue Jackets. So he has been an assistant general manager for the last 15 years. And before that, he was the Blue Jackets director of hockey operations. So basically a general manager, which in that case, if you consider that, he's been some kind of higher up in management for over 20 years. So this guy's coming in with lots of experience, and I think that this is something that was known was going to happen eventually. They didn't want to lose him. His contract was up, and rather than letting him go somewhere else, Joe Sakic promotes himself and slides McFarland in as the GM, which, hey, Sakic's like, hey, I won a cup, so I already proved that I was the best GM in the league, so now I'm going to just go and I guess watch someone else do it while he probably just gets to do the more fun parts, and he's having McFarland do the things that he doesn't want to do anymore. Maybe a little more traveling than what Sakic wants to do. Who knows?
Yeah, but Rickard Rakell, though, I like the deal. I think it's a good cap hit. I'm sure they wanted to bring the cap hit down because of signing Letang and Malkin and getting everybody under where they needed to be. And so they probably had to tack on a couple more years for this guy. And honestly, 41 points, he looked like he fit in pretty well in that top six and gives flexibility, especially since, Pittsburgh's losing, they're losing a little bit of depth in their middle six. So fits in nice, and I don't hate it, but, maybe they might regret the last year or two of that, but I think it's okay for now.
I just don't know. $5 million for a guy who's like barely, his career high, 51 points. I don't think we're going to see that again. This is a guy who's putting up 40 points.
Well, he had 69 points in 17, 18.
Yeah.
But still, I still think he's a 50-point guy playing with Malkin or Crosby. And even at that type of production, it's still worth it at $5 million. So
and we'll see how often he plays with Malkin, with the way that Malkin always seems to get hurt. But I also understand. Hey, he's somebody he obviously fit the culture. They obviously like him. They traded for him, and now they're deciding to keep him. They're bringing back Malkin. They're bringing back Crosby and Letang. We know that, and now this is, I think, just a situation. Who cares about 6 years from now? No one, because the Penguins will be bad at some point. Eventually you're going to get Malkin, Crosby, Letang as very aging veterans who, hey, still good players, but maybe they're not now good enough to not only not seek out a championship, but they're going to need some better pieces around them to even get them to the playoffs. You don't care about 6 years from now. You care about next season. That's all you're playing for, next season. And maybe the next 3 years is what you're looking at. There's your window. After 3 more years, your window is likely very much shut for the Pittsburgh Penguins. So who cares about the future right now? And you can deal with that when you have to. And at that point, who knows even what the league looks like in 6 years. A $5 million deal might look like what a $3.5 million deal looks like now in terms of cap percentage.
Yeah, apparently the cap's going to shoot way up in the next 2 years. So,
right.
Yeah.
We already saw record-setting revenues this season. It's going to happen again next year. ESPN and TNT are going to take hockey to new heights, and that's just that's going to make more money. Speaking of the Pittsburgh Penguins, also, said it, Evgeny Malkin resigns. This one was a little crazy because just the day before, I was hearing guys like Brian Lawton talking about how this whole thing fell apart and why it fell apart and why Malkin was going to be gone. And that was kind of the assumption was, it got out that he had texted guys on the team that the Penguins didn't want him anymore. Just true theater, I guess, from the Malkin camp, just trying to get stuff out there so the Penguins give him that 4th year, I think is what that came down to.
Yeah, Crosby got on the jet and said, you know what, hey, you're coming back, buddy.
Yeah.
And really, I'm sure he just walked into management and was just like, bro, come on, bro.
It's
and
Malkin. He's going to be in the freaking Hall of Fame, and he'll hang his jersey from the rafters. And if you screw him right now, it just doesn't make any sense. But I also get it. He's 35 years old. So all 4 of these years, there's a potential, if he retires, there's that massive cap recapture penalties and all that stuff that you have to pay. So
I think more than anything, they're worried about just him staying healthy, right? That's the concern.
But at a 6.1 cap hit, that's for what he can do when he is healthy, is fantastic. It's the fact that Malkin's making 6 and Raquel's making $5. Like he obviously he knew he took a pay cut because I'll say he took a haircut because he needed to because of his injuries.
Right. So he gets that extra year, right? So they can squeeze him in there.
Exactly. Okay. Starting off free agency, the official free agency day, those were all re-signings. Evander Kane, I guess, I mean, it's another re-signing, but he does re-sign with the Edmonton Oilers, barring like an arbitration case for his contract with the San Jose Sharks. There is still a chance that Evander Kane becomes the San Jose Shark again, which would be so funny. So funny. I just hope it happens because it would be so funny if someone goes, no, they shouldn't have been able to get rid of him at all. He's got to go back to the Sharks. That would be fantastic.
Oh my gosh, wouldn't that? And then not only that, but then he's got a higher cap hit, so that comes back into effect. And then if you're the Sharks too, it's like, oh, guess what? Now you went from playing with McDavid and Draisaitl to playing with Logan Couture and nobody. So sorry.
My guess is that in that case, they will find some kind of settlement. The Sharks are going to pay. They're going to end up giving him money for what they did. Like I think it's going to be found that, hey, you probably shouldn't have been allowed to do this, but we've all moved on. Pay the guy a few $1,000,000 and we're going to move on. Like I think that's probably what'll end up happening. That comes from absolutely no legal expertise at all. That just is my hunch. One more re-signing that I love. Josh Manson, 4 years, $4.5 million a year. That is a great cap hit for Josh Manson. I love this deal.
Yeah, I mean, I don't love it, but I like it. He wasn't as good as he maybe was in Anaheim, right? I think, his play has slipped as far as the offensive side of it goes. And look, his minutes are down. Obviously, he's not playing as many minutes.
Hey, 8 points in 20 games in the playoffs. He had a great playoff.
Yeah, I mean, his playoffs weren't bad. I didn't hate it, and I thought his production was pretty good. But, again, 17 minutes. He's mostly playing, on that second pairing. Again, I think, if you can go out and win with Jack Johnson, I don't care who you have on that, that bottom three as far as your defense is concerned. So, listen, I don't know if they needed to spend this money, but again, I like the deal because he's still a quality defenseman, and I think Colorado's going to look, very solid on that back end still with him there.
Yeah, very true. Obviously Colorado's trying to keep everybody that they can. They also re-sign Lehkonen. I can't find the exact term in this moment. They re-sign him, and they re-sign Darren Helm, 1 year, $1.25. Lehkonen 5 years at $4.5 million. I like that deal because I think that Lehkonen still has some ability to be placed in a better offensive scenario. I mean, he had 9 points in 16 games, 6 goals through 16 games for the Avs. I mean, that's a 25 goal scorer, which would far outpace his best season, which is actually his rookie year, where he had 18 goals. He hasn't scored more than 13. Well, okay, sorry, he scored 19 this year in total. But I mean, if you can get 20 goals from Artturi Lehkonen a year over those 5 years for $4.5 million, I think that's a great re-signing. And he fit so well in that third line role where he's just causing so much mayhem. I mean, he does more than just score. But the fortunate thing is that he can now score. He's actually contributing offensively as well, as kind of just mixing things up and being somebody who can throw hits and isn't afraid to get into those dirty areas.
Yeah, he's going to be a great two-way player that they're going to continue to have on their third line. Listen, he had a great playoff too. I think he had 14 points in 20 games. So,
and by the way, he's the Stanley Cup. He has the Stanley Cup winning goal to his credit.
That's very true. Yeah, I mean, he had some timely goals for sure. So, I think again, this is a good signing. You can put him in your middle six anywhere, and he's going to thrive. So,
and he can play
get a few more minutes.
If you have injuries, you have no problem with him. Like who he's going to end up playing alongside. Maybe he gets to play alongside McKinnon or Rantanen or Landeskog or whoever else. We don't know yet really who they're kind of pinning to be that second line center. I guess
probably
as of right now, you're talking. Yeah, you're talking Rantanen, but I don't know that they want to have him have to play in that spot.
No, of course not.
I don't know that that's your ideal, which they still have a little, like maybe a little wiggle room. They've got about $4.6 million in cap space left, so that's enough to go out and still make a little bit of a splash. But I mean,
go get one of them Strome brothers,
and that what an appealing place to go. Hey, you can come and check out what we did for Nazem Kadri. Come sign a 1-year, $1 million deal and leave and go sign a $5 million deal somewhere else, a 5x5 deal because of what you did with us on our second line. I mean, that's just the reality of it, is that they may be able to draw on one of those guys to be able to.
Well, not for $1 million.
Maybe not $1 million, but
Yeah.
at a cheaper price point than he would go and grab somewhere else.
Yeah, go cash in like Dylan Strome, right? You didn't get qualified. Come in here,
which is unbelievable.
Yeah, it is. It's crazy to me. Like, if I'm 24 years old, if I'm Chicago, I'm keeping him.
I mean, I get that with in terms of Ryan Strome, I get the Rangers. Hey, I mean, they're going to lose him there, but and they signed Vincent Trocheck, which is we'll get to that.
Yeah.
But yeah, Chicago makes no sense. Why wouldn't you match him and then just trade him? Even if you traded him for a 4th round pick, who cares?
Right.
Although my guess has to be that they tried, right?
Well, I would assume they did try, but maybe someone was like, yeah, you know what? We're good. We don't want to give you anything. We're going to wait, because they know at that point they're not going to qualify him. So they're like, well, just wait till he comes free and we'll try to sign him.
Yeah, but then you have to try to sign him. Whereas the other way, you can just match his offer and then he becomes a part of your team.
But, yeah, maybe nobody liked what they'd have to qualify.
Yeah, what they have to qualify him. Yeah. Well, okay, I guess let's do the Vincent Trocheck deal. 7 years, $5.625 million per. Do you like this deal for Trocheck?
I like the cap hit. I do not like the term. I mean, don't get me wrong. Trocheck is a good two-way centerman. I think he still has a lot to give on both sides of the puck. Now, the thing is, so when I look at what Ryan Strome was in New York, right? Ryan Strome was a guy that was quiet behind the scenes, did all the little things right, going in the corner. Trocheck, to me, is a dart where he is straight at the net, likes to have the puck on his stick, and so that's going to cause problems from what I would think would cause problems with a guy like Panarin, who likes to have the stick on his puck.
Well, I don't think he's going to play with Panarin.
Puck. Well, I mean, ideally, you're going to put Trocheck in the second line, and you're still going to keep Kreider with Zibanejad, so you got to put Panarin with somebody else, and that's Trocheck, right? So Trocheck and Panarin both like to have the puck on their stick as much as possible, so we'll see how that works out, right? So maybe you do have to ask Panarin to move to the right wing,
or maybe you are hoping that Trocheck can return to that 30-goal season. I mean, remember we had 31 goals in 17, maybe. 18, and since then he is. I mean, 21 goals, not a bad season this last year, but I know he has also had some injury issues, and but. A 51-point guy. He's an easy 50-point player every year. And
yeah, hate the term, but what I will say, I do love the fact that they got a guy who is really, really good at faceoffs, because that was where they really struggled in the playoffs.
That killed them in their own zone. Yeah, killed them in their own zone. The New York Rangers needed to do something about that center position, and I guess basically Strome for Trocheck, and I'll give. I mean, I don't think that's a massive upgrade, but I do consider it an upgrade, especially offensively. Strome is a decent defensive centerman, so with Trocheck you get a little bit more offense there, and I think that'll help them. And they also bring in Yaroslav Halak, a 1-year, $1.55, and Louis Domingue, 2 years at $775K. So. Kind of getting their goaltenders in a. I mean, they've got, I guess, 1, 2, 3 there with Shesterkin after trading away Georgiev. So they'll be set in goaltending.
I love it.
I think that's it for the Rangers so far. We'll stroll back to the beginning here of the day. Claude Giroux. It ends up happening. Claude Giroux goes to Ottawa, signs a 3-year deal, $6.5 million per, and he goes home. And this has to be my favorite deal of the day, I think. Because I just love, as much as I don't like the idea of the fact that the Leafs are going to have to play against this much improved Ottawa team, I like when guys go back home. I think it's cool. You know, it just is like, okay, cool. This guy wants to go back. I get he's not like Joe Thornton at 39 going and signing with the Leafs. Like, yeah, I've got, I'm going to go back and see if I can help win a cup. No, if you wanted to do that, you should have signed with them 5 years sooner to try and help them win a cup. It was too little too late, and Thornton just didn't have the impact offensively that I think he would have several years earlier. But at this point in Giroux's career, I mean, he's a point per game player. This is a great signing for Ottawa, and he's in a position to really have a huge impact on so many young forwards who just have not had great success in the league yet in terms of making the playoffs, any playoff success. And I think even though Giroux doesn't have a cup, I think he's got all the tools and all that experience to be able to share with those players. And that's like good experience, and you're still good. It's not like the Marlowe or the Thornton where it's like, well, you're not really that good anymore. But thanks for being here and taking the kids out to lunch, I guess. But Giroux is a guy, he's going to play in their top six, and he's going to be darn good.
Yeah. He'll still continue to produce. I mean, he's got the IQ, and he's playing with some really, really good players. I mean, Alex DeBrincat, Tkachuk, Drake Batherson, there's plenty of guys. Now, the one question I will ask you about this signing, does Connor Brown give up his number 28 to Giroux?
I think Connor Brown's going to get traded.
We'll see.
Not because of the number thing, but I think that Connor Brown is going to get moved. I really do. I think that in terms of where he fits into that lineup now, I wonder if he's the one that has to go.
Well, I will say I think it's a good thing if they do move him, because they need to free up a little bit of cap space, I think. I would like to see them make a big push for a big defenseman, and so maybe Connor Brown is that trade chip, right, to try to facilitate that sort of move.
Yeah, I mean, they still have $15 million in cap space, which that's cap space. That doesn't mean that they actually will spend $15 million more. Yeah, I love the Cam Talbot trade. I mean, after all the drama that happened with him, you just knew that it was. It's funny. I think we knew that Talbot was going to need to be traded before Bill Guerin realized it. I don't know how, Bill Guerin came out and said, after I thought about it, I realized that I didn't want to have this be a thing. I didn't want to have this hurt our team by this looming over our head, that there was obvious tension between Talbot and Fleury, basically on Talbot's side. And I was like, what do you mean? It took you how many days to realize this? Because I think we all realized it at the trade deadline.
Right.
And then when you went and re-signed Fleury, I knew it was over. I knew Talbot would be gone. I mean, I liked the idea of the two of them being a tandem, but it sure felt like, I don't know. How is this going to work? And Talbot, he doesn't have that many years left, right? He's 35 years old. I get, he's kind of in that, I'm not trying to put him in the same category as Tim Thomas, but that he hasn't played a ton of games early in his career. He's 35, but he also was playing backup quite a bit. He became a starter, and then he became a backup again. He doesn't maybe have all the wear and tear that some other goaltenders do at 35.
Yeah, he's only played more than 50 games 3 times. So,
but you're 35 as a goaltender. It's likely that you're not going to be in a position to be a starter, at least a 1, maybe a 1A, 1B, maybe a 1B kind of deal. But to be an actual starter, I think he probably doesn't have much time left. So, is he going to have competition from Anton Forsberg? Absolutely. And I know that the Senators love Anton Forsberg, and he actually really likes being in Ottawa. I think he's going to be given every opportunity to succeed, but there's a much more reasonable path to being the starting goaltender in Ottawa for Talbot than there was in Minnesota, where it was all but assured that Fleury was going to be given a much longer leash than Talbot.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
but I do like the move by Ottawa. I think Ottawa has had a fantastic offseason, bringing in DeBrincat. Just they're going to be a good team. Other than that defensive side, it depends on how good Jake Sanderson maybe can be. I still wonder, are they going to unload Eric Brandstrom and use that to kind of parlay themselves a defenseman either in free agency or by trade? If they can find that defenseman who's maybe a little further along than Brandstrom and include Brandstrom in a deal with picks or something like that to be able to bring a defenseman in. But yeah,
hey, go back to San Jose and see if Carlson wants to come back home, right?
Hey,
I'm sure they'd eat some salary for him.
Yeah,
too.
yeah. I mean, they'd have to eat half, and I don't even know if that'd be enough for Ottawa's blood. I might be too rich for Ottawa.
Yeah, I'll give you that.
At this point, I don't think that he's going to do it. But at this point, wouldn't you just love to see John Klingberg in a Senators jersey now?
That would be fun.
Senators kind of like I really something that I'm enjoying about this offseason is you've got these teams that last year they were legitimately bad teams. I mean, Ottawa was a bad team. Yes, they have a lot of young players. Don't get me wrong. I know they have got talent coming. They were not a good team. And they're very clearly making themselves better. They are trying to make the playoffs 100%. And I love these moves. The same thing goes for the Detroit Red Wings, who they have been a bad team. And what do they do on this free agency day? They go out and they sign Andrew Kopp to a 5-year, $5.625 per deal. They go and they sign Dominic Kubalik, who I think is an underrated goal scorer. 2 years, 2.5. David frickin' Perron, 2 years, 4.75. I was shocked that Perron was willing to leave St. Louis.
Well, they just couldn't afford him. So
I would have thought that he would have just tried to take a little bit less.
He wanted term, and they just obviously couldn't give it to him because they have all these young guys they had to give extensions to.
Yeah.
I mean, they gave Robert Thomas an 8 times 8 point something extension. So, and then they gave Nick Leddy a $4 million 4-year deal. So they don't have money.
Yeah, and he just was so good for them all last season. I love what Detroit's done here. They bring in 3 solid wingers. I think there's a chance that Kopp will play center for Detroit. Most likely, he'll be that second line center. I mean, they essentially just brought in a second line. Kopp, Perron, and Kubalik. Here you go.
You very well could. And the great thing is at 2.5, right? Kubalik can play on your third line without the expectation of having to produce as a second line guy, like maybe a guy like Andrew Kopp or Perron might have to at this point with their cap hits. So if Kubalik works out, right, you move him up, you can move. And not only that, too, but now looking at what Yzerman has, he's got just a bevy of forwards. So it wouldn't shock me now if they have to move a guy like Zadina out. But I'll tell you what, with all these defensemen they signed, Olimata, Ben Sherratt, right? I'm not so keen on the Ben Sherratt signing, at least from the term, right? I don't mind 2 years at 4.7, right, in hopes that he's that guy from Montreal in the playoffs, right, and not necessarily the guy who was in Florida last year. But the one thing that Detroit needed to address on their back end was size and defense, and Yzerman went out and did that with all these guys here.
Yep. I mean, I love it. I mean, he brought in a full line. That's basically what he did. Full line, front end, defense and offense.
Not to mention he addressed the goaltending situation at the draft too. So,
right,
man, hopefully, I mean, they might as well move the Arches from St. Louis over here. They got Sundqvist last year, Fabry. They've got Husso. They've got
very true.
David Perron. I mean, half of St. Louis's team is playing in Detroit now. So,
and what I see with this team, the beautiful thing is, I think long term on a Stanley Cup winning team, I think Andrew Kopp's a third line center. I think Dylan Larkin's a second line center. And I think that once you can, now they're starting to build this kind of everything down below. And once they can, maybe it's not that they're going to go and actually get a quote unquote pure number one superstar at the center position. But maybe it means that they're going to have 3 1B 2A kind of centerman, which I would say that they have two of those right now. They've got two 1B, 2A type of centerman. Like, I don't want Andrew Kopp as my number one center, but do I mind him as a 1A, 1B kind of center? No, not at all. I think it's a huge improvement on like a Pius Suter, who was kind of their second line center last year. And, you get a full year of Jacob Vrana, who I think a lot of people have just kind of forgotten about because of his injuries. And he didn't really have much to show last year. He scored 13 goals in 26 games. He had a really nice year for not playing very much. If you get that same kind of production next year with a healthy Vrana, you're talking about 40 goals. And if they can get a 30-goal scorer out of Vrana, suddenly this top six is as good as anyone's top six in this division outside of Florida, Tampa, and Toronto. And that's and you know what? And their bottom six actually may be better than Toronto's at this point because of the depth that they've been able to acquire. They don't have the high end. They don't have the high end guys like a Matthew or a Marner, or maybe even Tavares. If you want to put Tavares, I would put Tavares and Larkin kind of in the same breath at this point. In terms of production, and
sure.
I put them very similar, but yeah.
Well, hopefully Larkin's extension, he doesn't want Tavares money, so
he's gonna get something, but definitely not Tavares money. No.
Yeah, I think he'll get between $8 and $9 million.
But
8 years.
Yep. I would say that's about right. I mean, you're looking at you're probably out there. You're waiting to see what some of these other guys get in free agency. You're probably waiting to see what. Gaudreau, I know he's kind of in a league of his own, but at the same time, you're looking because he's going to kind of be the peak. No one's going to get more than him in free agency right now. And, maybe
Robert Thomas is a good example. I mean, you just look what he got, and he only put up one decent season.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean,
$8.5 million.
Yep. So
you also have Pierre-Luc Dubois, who's an RFA. I think you're really going to be like Pierre-Luc Dubois and Dylan Larkin. I'm looking at Larkin and saying I'd rather have Larkin.
Absolutely.
And so whatever PL Dubois gets, you're probably tacking on an extra $500,000 to $1 million a year. And definitely we're going to 8 years for him. You might even look to Nazem Kadri at what kind of AAV. Maybe I don't think Kadri is going to get 7 years on the open market at a 31-year-old, but I do think he's probably going to get 5. So,
yeah, that's fair.
Which, by the time you're listening to this, you might already know. But he has not signed yet. Any other thoughts about the Red Wings before we kind of move on? We'll talk goaltending here in Toronto because that's the next big thing.
Let's go, baby.
Okay. The Leafs, they go out, trade for Matt Murray. Matt Murray, 3rd round pick and a 7th round pick for future considerations. So we'll see what the future holds for those considerations. I did hear a story about future considerations that I just had to share. Crap, I don't remember the guy's name, but somebody in like the 80s was traded for future considerations. And do you know what the future considerations ended up being in that deal, Justin?
A 6-packer?
The same guy who was traded.
The same
They
guy?
traded him back. And that's how they said, yeah, this is the future considerations, was this guy. So he was literally traded for himself. But anyway, so Matt Murray goes to the Leafs, and Ottawa holds 25% of his salary. So he's at what, like $4.8 million or something, some number around there. I'm going to look at it. 4.6875 is what Matt Murray his cap hit will count against the Leafs. And then they go out and they sign recently not re-signed by the Washington Capitals, not qualified, Ilya Samsonov, 1 year, $1.8 million deal. Your thoughts? I'm going to get your thoughts here first. I know you're going to be pessimistic about this deal. And then, I'll find a way to spin it for my own brain so that I can feel better about it going into the season.
So when I look at,
talk to me reasonably here.
Reasonably. Okay. So let's just roll it back a little bit and remember that at one point they had a guy named Frederick Anderson who was stopping 6,000 shots a season. Okay.
Yep. Okay. I remember that.
Toronto's improved a little bit, but then they just, then they have this year where they have Freddie Anderson and Jack Campbell in the net sharing together. And it's like, oh, great. This is lovely. But you know what? Jack Campbell could potentially be a starter here, and Freddie Anderson's due a new deal, but he's probably going to be a little expensive. So
he had all the groin injuries, which, hey, he had another groin injury this year.
Absolutely. Understandable, right? So let's move on, right? We're not going to talk about Matt Murray's injuries, but anyways. So
we can talk about them.
So they decide, you know what? Let's go with Peter Mrazek from Carolina, who had a pretty decent playoff and regular season there. I mean, his tenure there was, again, injury mauled, but still had decent numbers when healthy. So let's go with Peter Mrazek. Let's go with Jack Campbell. Give him a chance to be a starter, right? I love Jack Campbell. I think he's a quality goaltender. Now, again, he has consistency issues, but when he's on his game, he could be top 15, top 10 in this league. But again, that's when he's on his game.
How many guys is that the case? When they're on their game, they could be a top 15 goalie. That's like anyone that's playing in the NHL, when they're on top of their game, they're a top 10 goaltender.
Well, let me just say, if every goaltender was at the top of their game, right, putting up their best numbers, I would, Jack Campbell would fall in the top 10 or 15 for me in that area.
Okay.
So, but anyways, I digress. So then they go with Jack Campbell, Peter Mrazek, and then you know what? They decide, you know what? Jack Campbell wants some term, but we don't like term. We don't want to give out term here. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to get rid of you. We're going to let you go somewhere else for 5 times 5. Which I'm sure they probably had. I'm sure they probably had a similar number in mind to, that Campbell came to them with and said, "Hey, this is what I'm looking for." Because again, Dubas came out and said it was all about term with this deal.
They offered him 3 years, 2.75 early in the season, according to that was like Elliot Friedman said that. And
sure.
You're assuming that Jack Campbell, I'm sure, came back and said 5 times 5, and they said absolutely not. You're a 30-year-old goaltender. We're not giving you a 5-year deal at $5 million. You haven't won a playoff series ever. I'm sure that's part of it.
It's understandable where Toronto's thinking was coming from, right? You got a guy who was up and down, wasn't really that consistent this season, and had some injury problems, right? So, of course, you don't want to invest long-term in a guy like that. I totally get it. But when you go from Freddie Anderson to Freddie and Campbell to Campbell and Mrazek down to Murray and Samsonov, 2 guys that weren't even wanted by their own teams, not just because of, Murray was all about money, right? They didn't still want to pay him, but he just couldn't put up the numbers, and Samsonov didn't even get a qualifying offer because he just wasn't good. Now, luckily for Toronto, I will say Samsonov can come in with a chip on his shoulder. He's still 25. He's still kind of developing.
And a 1-year deal, I mean, who cares? You can do anything.
He's an RFA, so he's still cost controlled, right?
Right.
So you can still bring him back if you want to again. And I think he's still capable of potentially being a 30-game, 1B goaltender, right? You could still have something there. And I would feel comfortable with that. But the Matt Murray thing, I mean, literally, there are so many other options out there. Now, again, I'm not sure how many other...
Are there so many other options?
I would have felt more comfortable going to San Jose and be like, hey, I know you got 3 goaltenders here. We'll take any of them. Literally any of them over Matt Murray. I would just...
I don't know, because Matt Murray's underlying numbers were pretty good. And when you consider, I know there's the injury issues he's had the last few years. He's still young. He's won 2 Stanley Cups as the starting goaltender. I mean, there's still something there potentially. Like, out of anyone you could have gotten, there are no other goalies with 2 Stanley Cups. There's no denying that.
Well, of course not.
Justin, who's the last goaltender to beat Vasilevsky in a Game 7?
Oh, yeah, it was Matt Murray. Right.
5 years ago.
Right. I mean, yeah, don't get me wrong. I know the history there with Matt Murray, and I know there's still that potential, right, where you could have a guy who can come in and maybe get back to close to form or whatever. But for me, like, I look at a guy like Aiden Hill, for example, right? He played on terrible Arizona teams.
Yeah, but you'd have to give up something for him, right? Like, that's the other side
absolutely.
of it. You'd actually have to trade something, and
right. Yeah,
I don't think absolutely. I don't think you look at Aiden Hill and say, there's a guy that's going to help us win in the playoffs, because he's never.
No, I don't think he's a guy that is going to take over a series. But again, Colorado did it without having a guy who took over a series either, right? He came in and just won them games, right? And that's really essentially.
I mean, they even had Pavel Francouz come in and win them a series,
right? So if you're Toronto, maybe you look at that, because this is a copycat league. Maybe you come in and say, you know what, hey, we just need a guy who can step in and win us games. We don't need somebody who can, And again, for me, the concern is necessarily it's just the amount of money, right? If maybe he'd come in around 2.5, whatever, right? Then maybe that's a little bit more palatable. But the fact that you gave up, essentially you're paying Matt Murray about $350,000 less than what Jack Campbell got. Right, that kind of makes it hard to swallow.
For three last years,
the term is the big thing.
And here is my prediction here. Now, okay, Samsonov. Do we agree that Samsonov still has some potential to be a number one goalie of a team that doesn't really need a superstar goaltender?
I won't say number one, but I will say he can be a 1B somewhere.
So he could start in the playoffs and he could be okay. I mean, he had a .912 save percentage in 5 playoff games this year for a bad Capitals team. He played very well in the playoffs. So, I mean, he could still step in like a Darcy Kemper. He could step in and he could be decent enough in the playoffs to win.
He can be like a Pavel Francouz to me, is what I see this guy. Yeah.
Okay. So you have him, and if Matt Murray gets hurt again, do you know what's going to happen to him? LTIR for the rest of the deal, and then you have that cap space to go out and you can go and acquire a goaltender. They're still in a position to, if Matt Murray doesn't work out, if everything what everyone fears will happen with Matt Murray does in fact happen, then you put him on LTIR and you can go out and you can acquire another goaltender during the offseason, right? Like, there are plenty of guys that are gonna come up in the next season that are going to be free agents. Goaltending wise, you've got Jonathan Quick, Semyon Varlamov, Ben Bishop's gone. That's Frederick Anderson. You're not going to bring him back, but you could trade for Cam Talbot. You've got all sorts of guys. I mean, Tristan Jarry is going to be a UFA. Nedeljkovic is going to be you want Nedeljkovic, but. There's enough guys to where there is the potential that you could go out and you could sign someone else or trade for someone else if it doesn't work out. And that I think is what they're counting on is, all right, if he doesn't work out, chances are it's because he's injured, and we will talk him into being on LTIR.
Well, I think for me, I would have liked to have seen them. Again, if they're not going to go out and spend money on a quality starter, right? Somebody who, again, right now is looked at as a quality starter, okay? I think I would have rather them have saved a couple bucks, try to find somebody a little bit cheaper and use that money because, listen, I think you mentioned it a little earlier that the big issue with Toronto is their bottom 6, right? Go out and get yourself a guy, maybe at a third-line center spot who can, or maybe on the wing, who can really help you as far as that, two-way game is concerned, right? And so you could go out and, I don't even know off the top of my head, but, maybe you go out and find try to bring in, a Nino Niederreiter or Evan Rodriguez, somebody like that. Granted, I don't know if they could probably afford them, but, or maybe even a Paul Stastny, right? There's a name. You could bring him in on your third line, maybe at like $3 million. Because he's looking for a 1-year deal. I'm sure you could get him in there on the cheap, saying, "Hey, you want a chance to win a cup? Here it is."
Sure. And that is kind of what the Leafs have done each and every year. They're going out and they're trying to pull a guy in. Now, here's one real fascinating potential little deal here. Now, what if let's say, who are we looking at that we might say, hey, maybe this player could sign in Toronto cheap, 1 year, $1 million. How about PK Subban?
Oh, didn't I mention him last year? I absolutely would be okay with that.
1 year, $1 million in Toronto. I mean, he'd be coming home. maybe he's just playing alongside Giordano on that bottom pairing, or playing with Sandin, or I don't know. There's not a whole lot of room in the Leafs on the right side unless they trade Justin Hall, who I think that'd be an easy deal. Could trade Justin Hall, no problem.
And what about Brett Howden too? I mean, go out and get him, or whom else could they bring in super cheap? Sam Steele, right? Both these guys didn't get qualified. Offers.
Yeah. Guys that other teams didn't want. I mean, you got to think there's a reason why those teams, I guess, didn't want them. But
I'm sure their phones will get called at some point. But
sure,
go out and get them now while they're still available. Brett Howden, I mean, he's a guy who can play some two-way minutes. I mean, he played pretty good in a limited time with Vegas. I like his production, and
yeah, I do wish that Phil Kessel would come back for a little swan song. That would be kind of fun.
That would be nice.
To be honest, there are still a lot of players out there that can be had. Maybe not necessarily on the absolute cheap, but in a sense, you could bring somebody in who, like we talked about, like a Dylan Strome.
Tyler Mott. There's a guy who would play a great two-way game for you in your bottom six.
Yeah. I mean, there's still plenty more to happen here in free agency for the Leafs, but also other teams. I mean, Calgary's going to have a buttload of money now that Johnny Gaudreau. It is all but confirmed that he is not going to re-sign in Calgary. I know there's the outside chance maybe, but it sure doesn't look like it, because the general manager came out, Brad Treliving, said no, we don't expect that he's going to sign here now. He's going to leave because of his family, and that's totally fair. Like, how are you going to be mad at a guy because he wants to go live somewhere closer to his family? That just is what it is. And they offered him 8 years, over $10 million a year. No one's going to be able to give him that, I don't think, in free agency at this point. So he's going to go somewhere where he's closer to home, and that's worth the money that he's not going to make. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there, because then a lot of other things will kind of fall into place once him and Kadri sign, which obviously they're taking a little longer because there's a lot of teams that are probably trying to talk to them. And remember, that week of free agent talking beforehand is gone, so sometimes those big deals do take a little bit longer when you're maybe courting a few different teams to kind of try and figure out where you want to go.
Yeah, with Gaudreau, I'm hearing it's down between the Islanders and Devils. I've heard Columbus's name in there, that they're trying to throw their hat in the ring.
No way, not a chance.
Yeah, well,
not unless they're going to give him $13 million a year and
right. But
72
Kadri,
virgins. That'd be the only way.
Kadri's doing it. I mean, he's meeting with teams and doing interviews, much like Brad Richards. I don't know if you remember that whole drama, but I suspect right now the reason Kadri probably hasn't signed is Philly's trying to offload JVR's contract somewhere so they can bring him in. So we'll see what happens with that.
And I mean, I think somebody like that would be willing to wait. We'll continue going through other free agent signings on our next show as more pour in. I know we haven't gotten to every single one. Unfortunately, my parents are in town, and I have to go make Brinner. So, got to make the old pancakes, bacon, sausage, hash browns, all that good stuff. So I don't want to keep them waiting. But one signing I loved, Nemesnikov back to Tampa Bay. 1 year, $2.5 million. Love this deal. Nemesnikov had a great resurgence last year for the Detroit Red Wings, and he was so good for Tampa back when he was traded by the Lightning to the Senators, or to the Rangers, at the time. And then he never really found that form again until, this season he had a good year. He had 16 goals, and I think he'll be a really good addition to the bottom six and also that second power play unit with him playing in front of the net.
Cool. Yeah, my favorite signing of the day, to be honest, Mason Marchment.
Oh, yes.
4 years, 4.5.
Love that.
Everything going on in his life, it's just great to see. He gets paid.
Rip Brian Marchment, one of the I just watching him as a kid, one of those guys that you just he was like Scott Stevens light, but not actually light at all, just not quite as good, but he was still equally as terrifying. So RIP to him. Any final thoughts there?
We didn't. Darcy Kemper, that's the other big one, goaltenders, because I got to always hit the goaltenders. Love this deal. I think Washington's going to get themselves a good starter here, and hopefully they'll get what they paid for. Because I think, again, with Kemper and Campbell roughly getting just slightly similar contracts here, I think you're getting a better goaltender out of Kemper than you would with Campbell, in my opinion. But
I mean, he's a Stanley Cup winning goaltender, right? Like, you're paying an extra $250,000 per year for that guarantee of, hey, remember me? I win playoff rounds and a cup.
Right.
So there's that. He will be 37 at the end of that deal. So God love him. Well, we'll keep chugging through these. We'll do another show this weekend, and until then, enjoy all the rest of the signings, enjoy the madness, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Find us on Twitter at OT Hockey Talk. See ya.